Dear Heavenly Father, give us the discernment to make decisions that enable us to follow the path you have set before us. Enable us to trust that the Holy Spirit is with us, guiding us, and help us to accept our past, enjoy our present, and embrace our future. Give us faith the size of a mustard seed. Give us the discernment to trust that you will provide us with our every need. Enable us to trust that you will surround us with your people and remove those that mean us harm. Grant us wisdom that only you can provide. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? I'm your host, Emma from The Imagination, and this week I am teaming up once again with Becky and Bridget from the Save Our Children podcast for a combo episode featuring jack of all trades and master of literally all of them, Remi Adeleke. When I say Remi's resume and life story is impressive, I'm not joking. I could easily spend an entire episode just on this intro alone. A true riches to rags and rags to riches story, Remi calls his life the true coming to America story. Born into African royalty in a small country in Western Africa, his picture-perfect life took a devastating turn after circumstances surrounding the death of his beloved father forced his family to uproot to America, which began a life filled with adversity and struggles. After years of running the streets out of the Bronx, New York, Remi knew he needed a change and enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 2002 and began his inspirational and transformational journey from streets to SEALs. Ironically inspired to join the Navy through the Michael Bay film, Bad Boy and Others, and having a story that reads like a Hollywood film, Remi probably had no idea that his own resume would one day include making an appearance in the Michael Bay film, Transformers, and scoring a major publishing deal with a book appropriately titled Transformed, a Navy SEAL's unlikely journey from the throne of Africa to the streets of the Bronx to defying all odds. A truly remarkable piece of literature you should all check out. Describing his life in one word, unexpected, Remi joins us today to discuss the debut of his short film of the same name, The Unexpected, that will premiere on September 30th and shine a bright light on topics that are near and dear to our hearts and typically shunned by creatives working in the entertainment industry, including human trafficking and organ harvesting. His harrowing film has already been met with high acclaim, and we couldn't be more honored to give you all the juicy details on this breakthrough project. So without further ado, it is our honor to introduce to you today, man of God, father, writer, actor, veteran, founder of Kijo Brand Apparel and his film company, The Eighth, voice for the voiceless and breakthrough film producer, the one and only Remi Adeleke. Remi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and blessing to be able to share with you all. And first and foremost, thank you for your platforms and what you're doing, engaging in this fight against this atrocity, human trafficking. So thank you.
Absolutely. We really appreciate, we said before the call, before we started recording, just how grateful we are to see more men, strong men stepping into this role. And we're really honored to have you here. So for people who might not know who you are or who might be new to tuning in to this topic in general, I'd love for you to expand a little bit on your story. You have a very incredible story. And like we said, we'd love to bring you on and we could talk about it for a million years. But for today, let's go over some of the major key things in your upbringing, and we'll bring that to where you are today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my story actually, I tell people all the time, it starts with my father's story. My father, he was a chief in the Yoruba tribe. In Western culture, we refer to royalty as prince, princess, Dutch, queen, lord, that sort of thing. But in African culture, especially West African culture, royalty is referred to as chief and or your last name. So my father, being the firstborn son to my grandfather had 9 wives, and he kept on having daughters. And but when my father came along, he just naturally, being the firstborn son, inherited the title of chief and our last name, Adeleke. So Adeleke actually means the crown is supreme, or the crown is above. my full name, Remi, actually means the crown has appeased me. So the title chief and the last name kind of that fell upon my dad, and so he was born with this prestige, and he ended up going to London and started studying architecture and engineering, and got his master's degree in both fields. And then he started building his wealth in the West. He was one of the first Black men on the board of the World Trade Center in America. He was the first Black man on the board of the British Financial Planning Council in Great Britain. And he was just super successful at everything he did. He was, a chameleon. He tried to touch everything and just build as much as he could build. But as he got into his late 30s to early 40s, he decided, I want to go back to Nigeria and take all of what I learned and kind of create a new Nigeria, because Nigeria is so rich in resources. There's cocoa, oil in abundance, natural gas, gold, you name it, Nigeria has it. There are some beliefs from a lot of people in Nigeria that Nigeria is the cradle of civilization, and that's why it's so rich in resources, because people believe that this is where civilization and humanity started. And so my dad wanted to really capitalize on that. So he moved back to Nigeria, started more businesses in Nigeria, and he bought a massive plot of land called Marico, which was a slum/swamp. And his plan was to build a financial sector similar to like a Wall Street, and not just a place where Nigerians could come and do business, but a place where Africans and Americans and people from all over the world, if they wanted to do business in Africa, they would come to this financial and business sector. Long story short, the Nigerian government years later ended up stripping my dad of all of his assets. I was born at the time. I was born right before this happened. So I'll back up for a second. So as my dad was developing his land and creating this financial sector, that's when my dad met my mom. My mom is a New Yorker, and they met in New York City. And then my mom, 5 months later, they got married and moved back to Nigeria. And then my brother was born first, and then I was born in '82, and I was born into riches. So because of my dad's success, he was a multimillionaire. So we had, cars and nannies and drivers, and we traveled all over the world. I have pictures behind me on the table behind me of, not this table right behind me, but the smaller table down below, with us in Paris and London and certain parts of Asia, just all over. We traveled. We had, security guards. We didn't live in a house. We lived on a compound. We just lived a very lavish life. And fast forward to '87, the Nigerian government stripped my dad of all of his valuable assets. One of the first man-made islands in the world they developed, which still exists to this day, Banana Island. My dad died days later. And because so much of his financial assets was wrapped up in these projects, we went from rich to poor. And my mom, being a New Yorker, just said, hey, there's no way I'm raising my kids here in Nigeria. So she permanently relocated us to the Bronx. So that's kind of how I ended up in the Bronx.
Wow. And you were at such a young age when all of that happened too. So even like that's a big transition in itself. And going from where you literally rags to riches, and like you growing up and now reflecting back on your childhood now, what would you say would be the biggest, especially with the work you do, what is the biggest misperception about you?
Wow, the biggest misperception about me. Because my life is so public, and so people have read my book and they've heard my story multiple times, and people know my work ethic, from whether it's in the SEAL teams or even now, like I don't get a lot of misconceptions. Most people, it's like once you put your life in a book and put it out into the world, it's like, everybody knows you at that point. It's so funny. When I went to go speak at yesterday in LA at a men's conference. And I was speaking on human trafficking and just merging the idea of faith and human trafficking. And, guys came up to me, I read your book. What about this? What about that? What happened here? What happened to your friend here? And this and that. And it's like, sometimes I get confused for a second because I'm like, how does this person know all this? But then it's like, oh, just for a small second. And like, oh, of course he knows my entire life because I read a book and he read my book. So yeah, I don't get a lot of misconceptions because my life has been so public, at least for the last 6 years.
And I love how transparent you are because, like we said, this fight, we need more men in it, and it's strongly led by women and moms. Yeah. And so we're honored to not only for your film, but the work and everything that you do and your book, even Transformed, because you're also helping the men. And you don't see, especially in society, you don't see a true leader and what a positive role model is. You have the entertainment industry put in, I would say the world in general, pushing such a dark agenda that it's such a, honestly, it's so refreshing to talk to someone and see the truth of it all. So thank you for leading that and being a great role model and example for the men to show that they can overcome their situation no matter what adversity you're faced with throughout your life.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So for those who haven't, again, like Emma said, haven't read your book yet or don't really know a whole bunch about you, you made it to the Bronx. You're with your mom and your brother, and you're kind of there trying to live life and make it through. And then you end up in the military, and now you're in Hollywood. How did that kind of transition happen from your younger life all the way until now?
Yeah, so not having a father, I began, I would say about 8, 9 years old to seek out a father in street life, hip hop culture, rap culture, that sort of thing. And that led me down a very dark path. I started out stealing from my mother, and then that progressed to stealing from stores, that progressed to stealing from jobs, that progressed to selling drugs, and that progressed to running high-level scams. And by the time I was 19, I had built a massive illegal enterprise where I was bringing in thousands of dollars a week as a teenager. And it all came crashing down at some point because I ended up getting involved in a deal with a drug dealer that went bad. I sold some products that were supposed to last for a certain amount of time. Those products only lasted for a fraction of that time. And essentially my life was threatened, and my mother's life was threatened. At the same time, there were people who were running the same scams that I was running, and they were getting caught, prosecuted, and sent to federal prison. So that whole those two situations kind of were a big wake-up call for me. And that's when I realized if something doesn't change, I'm going to either die or end up in prison. And so I made the drug dealers money back. And then that's when I decided, that was December of 2001. And that's when I decided, I'm not going to live this life anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to live this life anymore. And so for 6 months, I didn't do much of anything except for, meander around my apartment and try to brainstorm other ways, legal ways to get rich quick. And nothing came to me. And in June of 2002, that's when I felt this. There's a lot more to the story. People can get it all in my book, but that's when I felt this call to join the military. I felt this presence, something telling me you need to get out of here and you need to join the military. And I know it wasn't my idea because I hated the police. I associated anybody in a uniform as a police officer, whether you were Marine, EMT, firefighter, Navy, Air Force, whatever you were, I didn't like that. I like my clothes baggy, my hats backwards. I still wear my hats backwards, so you can't do that in the military. And I was allergic to order and structure. And so this idea of joining the military could not have come from me. And it was totally, totally foreign. And I battled once that thought came to me. I battled with it for minutes. And I was just like, well, no, there's no way. And then finally I looked around my apartment, not the apartment, but the bedroom I was in, and saw that my life had amounted to nothing. And I finally said to myself, what else do you have to lose? I know you don't like this idea, but, what else are you going to do with your life? You're not going to go to college. What can you do? And so I kind of said, screw it. Let's see what happens. And I went to the Marine Corps recruiter's office first. Sat there for 15 minutes. Nobody showed up. Went 2 doors down to the Navy recruiter's office. Met a Navy recruiter by the name of Tiana Nadine Reyes. She, had to take a practice ASVAB test. I passed that to get in the Navy. And then she ran my background, found out I had 2 warrants out for my arrest. And, I got up, got ready to leave. And there's a lot more to the story, but long story short, she ended up taking me to both judges the next day, the judge in New Jersey and the judge in New York. And she advocated on my behalf and said, hey, this kid's made mistakes, but he has potential. He can't join the military with a criminal record. Can you expunge his record? And because the offenses weren't like crazy or nefarious, both judges unanimously expunged my record, and then she went a step further and fudged the paperwork to sneak me into the Navy. So that whole story was essentially how I got into the Navy. Now, when I got to boot camp, I had already known about SEALs because I watched the movie, 2 Michael Bay movies, Bad Boys being one of them, was inspired me to kind of take, one day, if I ever turn my life around, take the path of a hero in some way. And then the second movie that inspired me was The Rock, because that was the first time I was exposed to Navy SEALs. And so when I got to boot camp, a Navy SEAL came to our division, and which was about, I think it was like 150 kids or something like that. And he put on a presentation as to what SEALs did and showed videos and all that. And that's when I was just completely sold. But I couldn't try out at the time because I didn't have the academic scores. I was super skinny, and I couldn't swim. And so I got to my first command naval hospital, Camp Pendleton, and I just trained. I trained really, really hard. And within a year of checking into my command, I was checking out. And, went from the skinny kid to a muscle-bound guy, went from a guy who couldn't swim at all to being able to swim proficiently enough to get into SEAL training, went from not having the academic scores to having the academic scores. And like I said, within a year of checking in, I was checking out and on my way to SEAL training. And got to SEAL training, made it, there's a lot more to the story. Again, I'm just speeding through a lot of it for the sake of time, but eventually made it to second phase of SEAL training. Got kicked out of SEAL training because I got really, really arrogant and prideful. Got sent back to Camp Pendleton, where I was stationed with 1st Marine Division. And then I came back to SEAL training a year later, made it through SEAL training, and was blessed to serve in the SEAL teams for about 7.5, 8 years. And was able to, travel the world, do cool things, make a difference. And then in 2015, my first son was born. And then in 2016, my second son was born. And around 2015, my second son was born. And around that time, my second son was born, I was on like shore duty, which is the best way to explain it's like admin duty. It's like, you're not in a platoon, you're kind of, but you're going to get ready to go back to an operational platoon. And that was what I was on track for. And I made the decision that, I have these 2 sons. My father died when I was 5. I want to be home as much as I can to raise my sons. So, I'm going to get out. And at the time I was in grad school. I had already got my bachelor's while I was in the Navy. And so I was getting my master's in organizational strategy from the University of Charleston, West Virginia. And so my plan was to go into business consulting. I have a family member who's a very successful multimillionaire, and and he introduced me to a bunch of his wealthy friends. And so I would do consulting with him and their businesses, and just taking special operations principles like, communication, mental toughness, critical thinking, leadership, team building, take those principles and translate them into business principles. And so that was the plan. And it didn't work out quite like I expected, but fast forward to I got out January 2016, fast forward to May of 2016 is when I was contacted by a lady who worked with Michael Bay. And I was, I remember it's Thursday, I was in my office and writing papers for grad school and not trying to pursue acting or anything, just focus on finishing grad school. And my phone rang and this lady said, hey, Michael Bay's looking for somebody with your background to work on Transformers. Are you interested? And I said, yeah, sure. I don't have anything else going on. And she said, hey, just send me some pictures and I'll show them to the director. And if he likes the pictures, then you can come. So I did that. And then, the next day I was on set. And that one day turned into 3 weeks, and 3 weeks turned into about 6 months. And I started in May, and I wrapped filming on the film December 2016. And that was my start in Hollywood. That's kind of how I started. Yeah, so I was kind of weird.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go or do you want me to?
It's okay. I kind of want either way. I just want to back up because I don't want to gloss over this part, especially because the Navy. And thank you so much for that whole timeline. One thing that, like, listening to you in not only other interviews, but also in your book, Transformed, one thing that stood out to me that was like a real eye-opener was your position in the Navy. And only less than 1% of Navy SEALs are African American and who held the same position as you. But I also want to talk, so I want to talk about that, but also your perspective and insight on why that may be, and especially for like those listening who want to join the Navy. And then from there, I want to transition into the education system, how that played a role in not only your childhood, but also could have affected adulthood, especially like going into the adversity that you reached later on in your life when it came to Navy SEALs and swim and all of that surrounding an environment that you were in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Less than 1% of SEALs historically have been African American, and that's going back to 1962 when John F. Kennedy commissioned the SEAL teams. I think I was like around the 50th or 60th African American SEAL in the history of the SEAL teams, it's definitely an honor to be a part of the community. But coming from my background, especially somebody who wasn't equipped to get into SEAL training, it was definitely like a huge achievement. But one thing I was always thinking about was I hope that I'll be able to open up more doors for other kids to be able to come into this community. And when I say open up more doors, I don't mean like in the sense that the SEAL teams close the doors to African Americans, because that's not the case at all. I just mean like allowing kids to see somebody from a similar background and say, hey, I want to do that. As far as like why I think that's the case, I think it all comes back to education and exposure. If you don't know about something, then you won't know to do it. The reason why you get a lot, I don't want to say not a lot, but the reason why you get a good number of kids in inner city communities around America who want to be athletes, pro athletes, or, who end up selling drugs, or who end up, rapping or wanting to be a rapper. The reason why, you can go to Bronx, like so many kids, like, especially when I was coming up, where like they wanted to be rappers, they wanted to do one of those three things. And it's because they're exposed to that. When you're exposed to that so much, then that's what versus when you go to other suburban areas, where there's nice pools all the time, or there's lifeguard programs, or there's like right here, I live in a really, really nice suburb in Southern California. And the resources that my community offers to my kids is it's night and day compared to how I grew up. And my kids are exposed to so much. They're exposed to nature, and they go to the pool, and my wife's a doctor, so they're exposed to medicine. And then given my background, they're able to go on movie sets and meet actors, and they're able to learn. My brother's an engineer, so they're exposed to, engineering and all that. So they're exposed to so much. So because they're aware of it, then they have options to choose from. Whereas in inner city communities, that's not the case. And based off my experience, where I believe it's derived from is the education system. The education system in the Bronx is really, really, when I was coming up, was really bad. And teachers don't really care. At least a lot of the teachers that I had, the statistics are pointed to, like, I think it was like 60% of kids drop out of high school. There's no real exposure to the type of programs, so elite programs in the inner city. I remember when I want to say right before my book came out, I went to my high school and I tried to get to speak at my high school. and I offered my services for free. I said, I just want to be able to show these kids, hey, I was right where you're sitting. Here's who I am now. You know, you have the opportunity to be, you know, be a SEAL or be a doctor or be an engineer like my brother, and my other brother's a doctor. You have these opportunities. So I just want to stand as a living example. And they gave me hell trying to come speak. And then they ended up not letting me speak. I never got a chance to speak at the high school I went to. And I find that that's the same thing with almost every inner city school. It's super hard to get in and speak. Even in Southern California, it's been ultra challenging. However, when it comes to suburban schools, they open up the doors for me to come in. I have no problems. You know, there was a school in Mission Viejo, California, which is a very kind of wealthy area, and they would have me come speak every single year with no problems. I didn't have to do all of the crazy things, but there's so much red tape, and it's something that I never really understood, but there's just so much red tape trying to get into impoverished or inner city schools, which is sad to me because I come from those environments, you know? So, and again, like I said, I've faced this problem a lot. So I think that what it all comes back to is education. You know, if kids are not aware of it, you know, and that's why I wrote the book, because I didn't write the book to, you know, say, hey, I'm a SEAL, look at me, look at the things I did. I wrote the book so that kids, and, you know, will be from all backgrounds, especially, you know, inner cities like where I came from, they can read it and say, wow, I didn't know, like, I could do that. Like, here's an example of somebody who did it. And so, sorry, that was not too long-winded answers on that.
No, not at all. That it's so inspiring. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that after everything that you went through and overcame, I consider you to be a survivor. Right? You overcame overwhelming odds in many ways to not be a statistic, and to go from not being a statistic in an impoverished area that sucks up so many kids, you know, that don't even ever get out sometimes, being part of this 1% statistic. Yeah. And a really decorated, you know, Navy SEALs, that's not just something, you know, anybody just does and can accomplish that. Like, only, you know, a certain little teeny percent of people even do that, much less 1% of that teeny amount, right? I'd love to know, as somebody who was previously allergic to order and structure, how did that actually help you go from being a victim to a victor, and to get you propelled on the path that ultimately changed your life, going from where you were to where you ended up?
Yeah, you know, I would say I had to shed it. You know, I had to, you know, get in line with order and structure. And the way I did that was with Tiana Reyes, my recruiter. So she died 2 years after she got me into the Navy. She died of a very rare autoimmune disease. And I didn't find that out until years later, you know, that she died, because I tried to find her, and so that she could see how her decision not only changed my life, but it's allowed me to change a lot of other people's lives via my story. And but rewinding back to that time period, she took a huge risk to sneak me into the Navy. She took a huge risk to take me to those judges. And the reason why, you know, the Navy didn't want me in was because to them, hey, once a criminal, always a criminal, you know, and which is understandable, you know, and I wanted to make sure that I proved her decision right. And I just remembered in my first command, like, there were times when I wanted to, you know, curse out my supervisor or get belligerent or, you know, not do my job right. And I always came back to her decision. And for me, it was always like, if I mess up, and I'm going to prove the system right that didn't want me in. But if I do the right thing, then I'm going to prove Tiana's decision right. And then that can potentially open up doors for so many other kids. To this day, I get contacted from kids all across America. And they say, hey, not just kids, adults who say, you know, I want to join the military, but I have this misdemeanor, or I made this mistake when I was a kid, and like, no recruiter won't touch me. I've been like blacklisted. I can't, like, what did you do? And my answer is always the same. It's like, we got to find somebody that's going to take a risk and, you know, share my story with whoever you're dealing with, because, you know, I was able to stay on the straight and narrow. So how I overcame my allergy to structure and order was I always kept Tiana at the forefront. And I made sure that, I wanted to do her proud and honor the decision that she made, because she didn't have to do that.
You're muted, Bridget. There you go. Well, I'm just going to say you're doing her proud. So I know that she passed away, but you absolutely are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And going back into the Navy in Camp Pendleton, if you can share your journey in the Navy as you made it through Hell Week, but you got held back. Can you share that journey, but also what does Hell Week entail? Because I know that when listening to some of your other interviews, like that sounds rough, like getting your hands tied and being able to swim and breath work and all that. It's not easy. So if you can just share that perspective based on your experience as well.
Yeah, SEAL training in general it's tough. It's considered the toughest military training known to man. Men have died in SEAL training. A guy died in my class. I almost died going through Hell Week the first time. Men have been permanently crippled by SEAL training. I know people who have broken, fractured backs and necks and all kinds of crazy stuff. And, men have lost everything trying to conquer the program and still fail. So it's a very, very tough program to put things in a perspective. The class that I graduated with started out with 270 guys, and only 29 of us finished at the end. And that's just the way it is every class. It's about an 80 to 90% attrition rate. And they torture you with cold, the water. I mean, you name it, they throw absolutely everything in you, but it's all mental. Every person that shows up to SEAL training has what it takes physically to make it through, because you have to take a physical screening test, which consists of a 500-yard swim, a certain amount of push-ups, a certain amount of sit-ups, a certain amount of pull-ups, and a mile and a half run in boots and pants. And if you pass that test, if you've essentially told the Navy that you're physically qualified to make it through the program, the question then becomes, are you mentally qualified? Do you have what it takes from a mental standpoint? And, that's what Hell Week is all about. Once you get through the first 3 weeks of first phase, then you go into Hell Week. It starts on Sunday, ends on Friday. They keep you up 6 days. You get 2 hours of sleep on Wednesday and 2 hours on Thursday, but a lot of guys don't even sleep because you've been so sleep deprived from Sunday to Wednesday anyway. Your body's just alerting up, and then you become hydrophobic, which means you become terrified of the water, so you can't sleep because you know that the instructor is going to come in at any moment and throw you back into the ocean. So it's a mental course. It's a course to weed out those who don't have what it takes, and because at the end of the day, we're not going through BUDS / SEAL training to make it through and to say, hey, look, I climbed this mountain. We're going through the training to go to war, to do those hard jobs that nobody, only a fraction of people on the face of the planet can do. And I've been on missions when we were actually backing up. When I was in SEAL training, I would always hear instructors say, "Oh, you think this sucks?" Like, my worst day in my career wasn't when I was in BUDS. It was when I was on this mission, and we had to climb this mountain. It was a storm, and we had to sneak in, and the guy, just horrible. And I would always scoff at that and say, "Yeah, that's impossible. There's no way." Your worst part of your military career was on a mission, and your worst part, I'm sure, of your military career was somewhere in BUDS. But no, that was such a true statement, because I remember being on a mission that was horrible. It sucked. It was supposed to be a quick 2 hours, not even a quick 20-minute snatch and grab of a high value target. It turned into a 12-hour operation, and it was 130 degrees, full body armor running. It was just miserable, but we had to keep going. And so what prepared us, what gave us all the reference point to refer back to when things suck was, hey, we've gone through the suck Hell Week. We've gone through BUDS. We've gone through these horrible things for a longer period of time. So we can do this. We can push further.
And you making it through Hell Week, if you can share essentially, like, how were you, the journey on how you were able to thrive even after your mindset and your setback, when pride and discipline got you stuck in that position to where you made it through Hell Week, but now you don't get to do where you thought you were going to be able to take this path.
Yeah.
You had to take a step back and had that minor failure.
Yeah. So after I got through Hell Week and in the second phase, I got very arrogant in my mind. I thought I had arrived. I was partying on the weekend and going down to the Gaslamp district and chasing girls and all that. And on the weekends, on Saturday and Sundays, the instructors would show up on their off time to work with anybody that had a deficiency. So if you struggle with a diet evolution, or you struggle with the obstacle course or swimming or anything, the instructors would show up on their off time to work with you, because once you make it through Hell Week, the military has invested a lot of money into you, and they want to see you make it through to the end. And so that's why they show up on their off time, to make sure that you can, they can help coach you through whatever struggle you have. And I was too busy staying out till 2 or 3 in the morning, waking up at other girls' house and apartments at in this 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., that I was too tired to show up to remediation on Saturday and Sunday. And like I said, I thought that, I had already arrived. And I ended up failing 2 swims, my first 2 swims in second phase. And then I failed the dive test 4 times. And that subsequently sent me to an academic review board where I was kicked out of training. But I always remember that was the first time in my adult life that I took responsibility for my actions. And that's where I learned a lesson that I try to pass on to people every day. And that's this, failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it. But if you learn from it, it's a lesson. And so the lesson that I got out of that situation was, one, never show up to anything in life unprepared. Always prepared. You can never be too prepared. In my opinion, you can never be too prepared. And the second thing is, when you reach success, you must remain humble, because if you don't remain humble in the midst of success, pride will bring you down. Pride will eventually destroy you in some way. And that's what happened to me. I got some levels of success, and then I got super prideful, and I carried those lessons with me back to Camp Pendleton. As a matter of fact, the day after I got kicked out of SEAL training, I was in the pool in my apartment complex working on the stuff that I needed to work on. And I didn't know if I would get a chance to go back to SEAL training. I didn't know when or if or anything. I just knew that in the case that happened, I would be prepared for it. So I just trained and through the grace of God, I was able to get back way earlier than a lot of other guys. I got back like a year later, and I remained humble, and I was super prepared, and I made it through.
I just always think of the movie G.I. Jane, because I look at that, and I know it's fiction and all that stuff, but I look at it and I'm like, there ain't no way in hell that I would ever want to go through that. And if it's even part of that, any of it, that's a huge deal to go through once and then have to go through it again. So again, congratulations on that, and thank you for your service, because that is huge accomplishment.
Thank you.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, just because I love that story of the underdog excelling. I think it's incredible. And I think we all go through hard times, no matter how developed you are mentally, physically. Everybody wants to quit at some points in their life. As a child who didn't, I know that you were very young when you had this really luxurious life, and that was taken from you at an age when that's really hard to understand for a child. As you were transitioning into that military life, what were some of the things that kept you going when that voice would creep in? Because you didn't grow up in a privileged area after age 5, where you were given all these tools to succeed and introduced to all these people and taught coping skills and how to avoid getting in trouble and how to, continue being consistent. What were some of the things that you think helped you become one of those final 20-some that got chosen at the end, when, people that probably grew up in a more privileged type lifestyle couldn't even accomplish what you did?
I always say it always all goes back to my mom. So my mom, when my dad died, she very beautiful woman. You know, she's on social media more than I am now. She's about to be 70 years old, and she's like a fitness guru. And she is 70 years old. She just turned 70, and she's like a fitness guru, and she trains people, and she's super fit. People think she's my sister because she looks young. And my mom always had that go get it mindset. You know, she's never remarried after my father died. She stayed single, and, you know, she could easily found somebody and, you know, and had somebody help take care of us and all that, but she didn't do that. She worked multiple jobs to provide for us. There were times when she didn't have enough food to feed herself. She had just enough food to feed my brother and I, and she would put the food on the table and watch us eat in the doorway. She wouldn't complain. She wouldn't clutch her belly. She just, you know, embraced the situation. And she was the model of perseverance and excellence, and just running through walls, just getting the job done, not complaining, not whining, recognizing the situation, and still putting one foot in front of the other. So when you grow up with a person like that, you know, every day of your life, it's like it becomes second nature to just see a mountain and say, I can climb it, and then go climb it. Or, you know, pick yourself up after a setback, or pick yourself up after a major failure. That just became a part of my nature. This is just like a kid who grows up in a home where they're abused by their father or their mother, and then they get married, they grow up, and then they're abusing their spouse. You know, that's part of the nature, because that's what they saw. That's how they were raised. You know, and all I had in my mom was a person that, you know, no excuses. You know, she would tell my brother all the time, whatever you do, do it right. She would make one night, it would be my turn to wash the dishes and my brother's turn to dry the dishes. And then we would flip-flop. The next night I would dry and he would wash. And if the dishes weren't done perfectly, she would take them all out and make us do it again. And, you know, and she would always tell us, whatever you do, do it right the first time. She would make us read New York Times articles and write reports, because she believed in the power of education and being able to articulate your thoughts on paper. And, you know, and we hated it as a kid. I hated it as a kid, but, you know, I'm a writer now. You know, I wrote the movie that we're going to talk about later. Like, I wouldn't have had the skill set to be able to write it. My mom didn't make me do it. And if those reports weren't near perfect, she would make us pick a new article and write a new report. And we weren't allowed to go outside and play until the reports were perfect. And, you know, so when you grow up with somebody who's just, they catch the vision of who you can be. And, you know, my mom would always remind us of what our names meant, our Yoruba names, our Nigerian names meant. And she would say, hey, this is the standard that I'm going to hold you to, because I know that you guys are valuable and you guys will be assets to society and you guys will be great. And then she didn't just tell us, she modeled it by working extremely, extremely hard and sacrificing so much. And like I said, that's what got me through. So when I showed up to Buds and it was hard, it was normal life for me, you know, because my life had already been hard. And I tell people all the time, you know, life is hard, but the way you overcome a hard life is by doing hard work. And I lived a hard life, but I did a lot of hard work. And that's what ultimately has led to a lot of my successes. It's the fact that I've just find myself in these hard situations. Just, you know, being in Hollywood and trying to be a filmmaker is extremely hard. You know, it's extremely hard to raise money. It's extremely hard to, you know, find people you could trust. It's extremely hard to create ideas that, you know, people want to get behind and execute on a screenplay. But my whole life has been hard. So, but again, the cornerstone for me being to be able to overcome these adversity that I face has been my mom. That's why I've gotten through a lot of the stuff that I've gotten.
That's amazing. Your whole story is just awesome, but I just think everything you've overcome is so inspirational. And, you know, that's, again, something we all deal with, is how to overcome those humps. And I love all the little tips that you gave. I know people on the other end are like, oh my gosh, I can use that. So segueing into your film, I want to talk about the film. I know we all have questions for you, and I can't wait for you to be able to talk about that. How did you come across the term human trafficking? When did that topic come into your life, and what sparked this passion of yours to create a film from that?
Yeah, so after I got out of the military in 2016, I still felt this calling to serve in some way. After having I spent pretty much my whole adult life was in the military. I joined when I was 19. I turned 20 in boot camp, so my whole adult life was military, was service. And when that went away in 2016, and so I meet so many veterans who also feel the same way. We still feel this need to serve. Not have a job yet. Have a job is a part of it. Like that's one thing, but serve. And sometimes our job can be part of serving. Serving can be a part of our job. Sometimes, we have our job, but then we serve on the side. But that I just felt this need to serve. And I did different things. I did inner city outreach and went to inner city schools and spoke in schools. And I went to prisons and spoke in prisons and hung out with guys in prison, murderers. I mean, not just men's prisons, but women's prisons as well. And then one thing that kept popping up, and interestingly, people kept reaching out to me because as my story became more public, people would say, hey, your story is cool. Like, can you come do this? Or can you come do this? So a lot of these things that I did were things that I was like, hey, I want to go to prisons, or hey, I want to, it was just things that kind of naturally came to me in my pursuit to find different ways to serve and share my story. But human trafficking kept coming up. There was a nonprofit out of Sacramento called Without Permission. I can't remember what year, but it was early on after I got out. They reached out to me and said, hey, can you come up to Sacramento and help out? We're doing this big human trafficking rally. So I went up there. Me and my wife came to that. I can't remember which one of my kids came. I think my oldest came with me, or both our kids may have come. And we did this big human trafficking rally thing in Sacramento. And then Slave to Nothing reached out to me a few years later, maybe 2 or 3 years later. Slave to Nothing. This was years later because this Transformers had already come out. So this was either 2017, 2018, and Slave to Nothing is the founder of it is the owner of In-N-Out Burger, and Lindsay. And so she reached out and was like, hey, can you help out with this charity bowling game for my human trafficking nonprofit? So I was like, yeah, no problem. So it was just a recurring theme. And like another nonprofit reached out to me, I want to say around early 2018, and because there was a SEAL that worked with this nonprofit that specialized in rescuing kids and women trapped in human trafficking, and the SEAL, his name is Dave Lopez. We were in buds together. We were in SEAL training together. He's like, dude, we're always looking for SEALs and former special operations guys to go down and do deployments and help with rescues or help train the local police, to do raids and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, cool, I'm in. And so I went down to South America with the nonprofit, and the big eye opener for me was we went down to DR on a trip, and we were in this particular slum that was, it was a slum. It was bad. I've been to some slums in this world, a lot of that, but this was like nothing I had ever seen. And we were walking down this small road. It was like a small road that only like I don't know, not a motorcycle, but the moped type vehicle that they would drive on. And there were all these shanty shacks that people lived in on each side. And this particular slum we were in, the parents would sell their daughters to traffickers, and the daughters would be taken to the north of DR, and Westerners would come have sex with the daughters, would pay for sex. And this is Americans, this is people from Europe, and we know that the profile for men who travel overseas to have sex with underage kids are American men. And so in this particular slum, the parents would sell their daughters to the traffickers in the north. And as a parent myself, I couldn't quite grasp that concept. It was just like totally foreign to me. And our liaison, I was asking a lot of questions just naturally to understand, because that's just something. My dad was an engineer, and so I kind of had my dad's engineering mind of like wanting to kind of figure out, like, get to the solution. How does this? And so the liaison pulls me into this chapel that was no bigger than maybe 3 toilet stalls in a public bathroom. And at the end of the wall was a casket, and there was a 6-month-old baby in a casket that was dead. And the liaison explained to me that this particular baby died because the mother, she wasn't getting enough sustenance, water, foods, and so on. So her milk dried up. And so she got some formula and she mixed it with the local water. Now, this particular slum, you're not supposed to drink the water. You drink the water, you die. And that's what ultimately killed the baby, was the baby had this water, this bad water mixed with the formula. And so what he was kind of trying to explain to me was that this is the plight. These people are so desperate. For them, it's either we sell our daughters, or if it's a family of 4, we sell our daughter to the north, and then we get money, and we get, so we can get food and water and so on and so forth, so that we can feed and clothe and, our other kids, or all of our kids die. Now, again, to me, that doesn't justify it, but that's the mindset, utter desperation. And, I know we'll get into it later, but the more I started shifting my focus towards organ harvesting, that's the trend. Typically the people who are trapped in these rings, and most human trafficking, they're people who are desperate, absolutely desperate, from the victims, from the person who's benefiting from the organ, and even in some cases, traffickers, they're desperate, they're evil and desperate for money. And so, when I got back from that particular trip, that was 2018, that was July of 2018, I'll never forget, because when I landed in Miami, I had all of these voicemails from a guy by the name of Michael Case. He works with Michael Bay. He's Michael Bay's producing partner. And Mike Case had been looking for me because Michael Bay was starting his next movie, 6 Underground, and they wanted to hire me to be the lead consultant on that film. And so it was like, in that moment, these two worlds collided. This one world of human trafficking, which is horrible. And also, in my mind, I was like, you know what, I can go and rescue 100 kids, but there's going to be 100,000 more kids that need to be rescued. And so I'm not saying I don't go do that, but I'm saying, where can I have the biggest impact? Because it's going to take more people need to get involved. It can't just be, I don't know, I'm just throwing out a random number, so I'm not saying this is the accurate number. It can't just be 1,000 people or 2,000 people in the world, really engaging in this fight, because it's a global problem. There's more people enslaved around the world today than any time in human history. And so, I took this, I was just like, all right, human trafficking, film and TV industry. I've been in the film and TV industry at the time for 2 years. So I was like, let me merge these two ideas and create like what's called a PSYOPs operation. So when we're overseas and we want to win the hearts and minds, I'm sure you've heard that term before, winning the hearts and minds of the locals, we do different things like, drop pamphlets, we give food, we'll, do certain things, we'll build a playground or something, just so that the locals see, all right, these are not us as Special Forces SEALs guys, but specific military units will do that, so that we can win the hearts and minds, so that now these people feel more comfortable in giving us information about where the bad guy is, or allowing us to, move through their neighborhood, or we need them to leave their neighborhood for a time so we can carry out an operation against a bad guy, so we can get them on our side. And so that's what came to mind. I want to use my film and TV background to create a PSYOPs operation where I create a story that people can watch and then see, be shocked and say, wow, like I need to do something. Like I need to get into this fight. Like I need to give, I need to volunteer. So that's kind of how it all came together. It was like doing that trip and then coming back and getting hired to work on like a big Netflix movie. And that's where I was just like, I got to merge these two worlds, because, most people won't read New York news articles, and media doesn't talk about human trafficking a lot, right? As much as they should. And local media does. You'll hear these local stories from all around the country, and then you'll hear like international stories. But as far as like mainstream stories, you don't get a lot of it. And so, I was just like, why don't, part of it is, and also people won't read news articles, right? But people watch movies. Like people will watch a movie. especially if it's done right, especially if it's not some cheesy, corny, movie, people will watch it. And so, I just figured, I want to create a movie that people will watch and then be inspired by it or motivated by it or go do something. And that was kind of where it started. And so, I want to say it was a longer journey, but I wrote a TV, what's called a TV treatment for a TV show that was called The Unexpected. And I finally got it done and submitted in 2020, in September 2020. I know because I just had to look this up for contract reasons the other day. And my agent took that around town to try and see if we can get a TV series. And the way I made it, it was like this, this DIA agent, he's trying to find a link between terrorism and this terrorist attack, but he doesn't know that human trafficking is tied to it. And so like he's gradually uncovering this thing. And then these characters, on the other end who are being trafficked and they're linked to this attack that's going to eventually happen, but we don't know what's going to happen. And so it's told in a very, from a timeline, it's not told in a linear format. It's kind of, almost like Crash. And the feedback that we got from people in the industry was like, hey, this is great writing. This is a great story. But given the fact that we're in COVID and, and people are like, dodging COVID and all the stuff going on with the racial tension in the world, the last thing people want to do is come back home and watch some dark, depressing thing about human trafficking. And I disagree with it because, there's a lot of, horror movies and people getting chopped up and sex and Squid Games and all of this stuff. And I'm not knocking it or anything like that, but I'm just saying, like, the fact that people watch that shows that there is an appetite for it. And at the end of the day, there is an appetite for truth. And so I was like, all right, Roger that. So I put the treatment aside, and then a year later, well, no, actually September, October, November. So I would say about 7 months later, in May of 2021, the first week of May, that's when I said, screw it. And I remember I was watching a video right here on my computer, on a YouTube video about if you want to make a movie, stop waiting for permission. If you want to make something, stop waiting for permission. The problem with filmmakers is they're always waiting for somebody to do it for them. They're waiting for money. They're waiting for permission when, you could just use your iPhone and, shoot something. And that, like, literally, I'm sitting here and I'm watching this YouTube video, this guy say that. And I was like, man, this guy's freaking right. You know what I mean? Like, I've been waiting for somebody to give me permission to make this. And I could just do it. Like, why don't I just do it? And my Brad, my assistant, I left my office because he works right on the other side of the wall. I said, bro, we're making a movie. He's like, what? I was like, dude, we're going to tell this story. We're going to get the word out there about human trafficking. We're going to make a movie. And so that's kind of how it all started. And literally that idea came to me in May to just go make this movie. And I believe it was from God. It was God's word through that guy who was like saying, you got to make a movie. And he wasn't Christian or anything. He was just, it was just God spoke to me through that situation. And then we were shooting the movie at the end of May. The last week of May and the first week of June is when we wrapped on the movie. And you got to understand, like, that's unheard of because typically with a movie, and this was a large scale short. I hate to even, I hear other people say, this is not even a short film because a short film is typically 10 minutes. This is a 32-minute film. It's a specialized film. And with a film like this, you got to have like a month or 2 months of pre-production and scouting and all of this stuff. But, going back to the way my mom raised me, it was just like, okay, here's a mountain. I'm going to climb that mountain. Like, the mountain is trying to be a SEAL. People say, hey, you can't be a SEAL. I'm going to be a SEAL. The mountain is you can't make a movie in such a short period of time. I'm going to go make it happen. And, I had, thank God, I raised the money. I hate to say raise the money because it was my personal money. I raised $150,000 of my personal money out of my personal savings account. And I had another guy give me $20,000. And that's how I made the film. And I found put a message out on social media. Hey, I need a private jet. I was able to, had a big time celebrity guy connect me with a private jet company. I had to pay $21,000 for the jet for 14 hours, but got the jet. And, I got actors that I had went to acting school with or I met along the way. And then a buddy of mine who I was in the Navy with, he's a filmmaker in Kansas, and he had been trying to get me to try and ask Michael Bay to come shoot a movie in Kansas. So I was like, hey, I called him up. I was like, hey, can we shoot in Kansas? Like, you have access to a crew that's not going to be too expensive. And all of a sudden he's like, yeah, let's do it. And just everything came together like so beautifully. And, you know, it was a lot of hard work, but it came together. And then that was the story about how the film got shot, you know.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what the movie is and get into the actual synopsis and stuff. But I want to thank you for standing up and making the film, because for the three of us, we educate, we bring people on, we talk about it. We're not knocking doors down. We're not doing all this stuff, but we know that the way that media, Hollywood portrays these things is like it's fiction. And so we come out and there are books that talk about this, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember in that one story I read, or like Taken. You always hear Taken. I remember in Taken that happened. And for us, it allows us this opportunity to say, watch this movie, read this book, because this is what's really happening. You may think it's real, or you may it may read to you or watch like fiction, because it is so out of our realm of possibility that's the way that it's going to seem. But that's exactly what is happening. And so like I had a coworker once, she found out I was doing human trafficking, and we were talking, and she's like, oh, I read this, I don't even know the author, read this story, and they were talking about how they took girls from somewhere in Europe and put them on boats and brought them to Florida and then trafficked them. And I was like, that's actually how it works. So that's not fiction he's writing about. He may normally be a fiction writer, but what he's writing actually occurs. And she was blown away. And so it's nice to have that reference point of, go watch this movie or this movie, and then let's take a look, because we can educate. This just brings it that kind of one step further.
Exactly 100%.
And I just want to say, honestly, thank you so much for everything that you do. On our podcast, we often talk about the power of one. And we just worry about reaching that one person, because everyone's connected. They're going to connect you with somebody else. So thank you for everything that you continue to do, especially on this topic, human trafficking and organ harvesting, especially in the world of censorship. And it's so many people turn a blind eye to it and don't believe it's real. So we often say everyone has a story. So thank you for not only your service, but also your experience, not like in childhood and through the whole military background, special ops, and really bringing this to life, because it's something that people have to see. So many people will not get involved until it hits home, sadly, until it's at their front door or someone that they know. And it's so frustrating, especially as working with survivors and advocating, and you've seen it firsthand. And it's so sad about all the gaslighting that happens. So we are honored to share this film, because it has to hurt. As much as people sit here and say the whole pandemic and there was loss and all that, but no matter what angle you come in from, the center and the root has always been human trafficking and the children. And so I just love even your background, you being a father and being able to have this conversation. We know it's uncomfortable. We don't want to have it, but it's the reality that in the conversation we need to start having.
100%. And, you know, you bring up a great point. So many, I think it's twofold. I think one, it's people don't know how to tell this type of story as well, you know, because it is a hard story to tell. That's kind of why I went the route that I went, and, you know, telling the story in reverse. Because if I told the story in linear fashion, you know, then it's tough, you know, because there is not this big rescue at the end of the film, you know, and the reality is that story is not my story. But that story in the film is somebody's story. Like, this film is not something I pull out of my butt. Like, oh, let me just, it's based off of true events. And again, I don't want to give away too much. You know, we kind of talked about offline. We don't want to give away where these victims come from. But, you know, this actually happened. And it was a genocide that took place, you know, not too long ago. And there's still people that are recovering from that event that happened with those specific people in the film. And I was talking with a guy about 3 or 4 days ago, and he's watched the short film since then, but he's worked with the particular group of people who are the victims in the film. And he was like, I can't, like, it's so crazy that you have this group, because I've known this story for years. He did some type of journalist work when he went to this particular country and interviewed like the surviving, you know, family members and friends, and was like, it's so crazy that you pinpoint, because this should be a massive story. And I wonder why. And so again, these people's story in this film, the victim story in the film, has not been told, especially on a scale like this. And it's important for their story to get told, because as I say in the opening of the film, you know, closing our eyes to the darkness in this world doesn't extinguish it, but only deepens it.
Remi, could you give us an elevator pitch for your film? I know we don't want to tell too much, but I really want people to understand how much work you put into this. This isn't just, for one, you didn't pull it out of your ass, right? And for two, there was so much thought that went into it. Yeah. I'd like for you to just talk about the film and give people an idea of what to expect when they go watch it.
Yeah, so the film is, and feel free, you guys already know the parameters too. So if there's something you want to discuss or ask or bring up from your viewing, feel free to throw it in. Yeah, I mean, the story in a nutshell is based on true events and told in reverse about victims trapped in an international organ harvesting ring. And it is international. The story takes place in multiple countries. You know, I was blessed with the opportunity to be able to make one city, Kansas City, look like multiple countries. And it's real, it's raw, it's authentic. At the end of the day, my biggest pitch when I tell people, this is real, it's authentic. I mean, like I said, I've gone up against these type of people. I've done tons of research. Traffickers are not a bunch of idiots. They're very, very intelligent. Their organizations are very intricate. They employ people who are considered the top echelon of society, whether it's politicians, police officers, whether it's doctors. As a matter of fact, a lot of doctors and nurses, medical professionals, as it relates to organ harvesting, are driving this thing. There's a story out of Egypt, which Egypt is the organ harvesting capital of the world, which a lot of people don't even know. And there was a ring that was busted in 2016, and of the 45 people that were arrested in this organ harvesting ring, the majority of them were doctors and nurses. And they also recovered millions of dollars. So going back to the film, it's authentic, it's real, it really exposes the realities of organ harvesting, but also the intricacies of it. And we have a follow-up film. There's a film that the short film just got picked up to be a feature film, which is a full-length film. And that story takes place 5 years later. And in that film, since I have more time, I go into greater detail of the intricacies and the complexity and how much of a reach these organ harvesting and human trafficking rings have. They're not just relegated to their city. They have networks all over the world. So yeah.
The thing that we talked about earlier, and you brought it up a little bit ago about how you told the story actually makes it a little bit more palatable as it's going through. So if you start at the beginning of the story, the way like chronologically it should go, it would truly seem more fiction. Like that would never happen. But if you start at the end and you work your way backwards. So as the viewer, you get a little bit more information and a little bit more information and a little bit more information. And then you start piecing the story together. And you don't realize, you said it's international. I think that it's 3, 4, 5 countries you have them going to. And it's like, wow. Okay. So this part here is, and I'm not giving things away. I'm specifically being vague, but this area here ends up here and then also includes this place here. And you would never even think how vast it is. Like, you think, oh, well, that just happens over in the Philippines, or that just happens over in China, or that is, and it's like, no, wait, it does, except it's also connected to South America or the US or Europe or wherever. But the way you make it all work is so, I don't want to say easy to watch. The topic itself is not easy to watch, but it's easy to watch where you're like you're done. You're like, whoa.
Yeah. And that was the goal, and that's why for me, the private jet, that's one of the reasons why that specific private jet was important. I had the opportunity to get a free private jet, but it was a small one. And there's no way realistically it could jump. It could get from this place to this place to this place, no way. And so the reason why, I was so hardcore with my line producer about, hey, I'll spend the $21,000 is because I wanted to keep it realistic. So one thing we know, and I'm sure you all know this, there are traffickers who are connected to not just the Middle East, but also Eastern Africa, and they move girls into Dubai and other countries. How is it done? It's done via private jets. Even in the US, like some victims have been moved via private jet, definitely in South America. And with a private jet, you don't have to worry about, in a lot of cases, especially in other countries, you don't have to worry about going through strenuous customs and getting searched and all of this other stuff. You have a free pass. And, and some of these girls, they'll get on a private jet looking, and thinking that they're going to, a job or going, and then they end up getting to this particular country, their passports get taken. And before you know it, they're enslaved, for the rest of their life or taken. And so I say all that to say that it's good. I'm glad that you pointed that out, but that was why the private jet in the film was so significant and integral to the reality of this, because this is how these people operate. It's not just, yes, people are trafficked via vessel and boats and ships. And a lot of that is happening. I live in San Diego, and San Diego is one of the biggest hubs for human trafficking in the country, if not the world. And so we do have the vessels that get moved in. Same thing in Florida and Houston, right? But there are bigger tiers, bigger levels of this thing where people are using these high-end, vehicles, aerial vehicles to move people, and customs and police and normal people, they don't think anything of it, because they're like, here's this rich guy with his, with this girl, with these kids. I remember about, I want to say 4 months ago, I had to go somewhere for a TV show, and a driver came to pick me up in my house, and he started his own transport business. And we got to talking about the film, because he was from, I forgot where he was from, but anyway, we got to talking about the film, and maybe somewhere in Eastern Europe, and that's how we got on the topic. And he was like, man, that's crazy. He's like, dude, I believe it. He was like, I get hired all the time because he has like a luxury SUVs, Escalades, all that, to go to Signature Airport, which Signature Airport is a private, it's right next to, it's pretty much connected to the main San Diego airport, but it's a private jet airport that's off to the side. And he said, I get calls there all the time to pick up coolers that have organs in. And he was like, and sometimes pick up people, but he said he's picked up coolers, and then he's been told, just get this to this hospital, get this, no question. He's like, dude, I always thought that it was something weird about that. So I'm not saying that these were, these are trafficked organs at all. I'm not saying that at all. But the main point he was trying to make was, I believe it happens because when I get these jobs, I'm told not to ask questions, get the organ, get it to this hospital ASAP. And he does it. And so, you know, that just speaks to this idea of these private jets and other luxurious vehicles, yachts being used to move people around because it's low vis. It's like that person can't be a trafficker, you know.
And I wanted to comment on that because too seldom we talk a bit about this amongst ourselves, and I think it's been brought up on the podcast, but typically when you do see trafficking highlighted in anything that sees a lot of eyes, the way that it's shown is that the person committing the crime and trafficking is this crackhead looking, homeless looking person that seems like a very obvious type of criminal. And we don't always see people like that in life. So we just think, well, I don't ever see that, you know, unless I'm in like the slums, but I live in a good area. That doesn't happen where I'm at. And people have no idea that a lot of the people, this isn't just something that, you know, a non-resourceful person could accomplish. Your film highlights how many different levels, people, demographics, places in the world, time zone, structure, all of it that goes into one operation and all the different people, private jets, right? That you're right. Like we're trained as a society to look at somebody in a suit and with a jet and admire them and not ever question and think that they could be a criminal, right? We look at the crackhead looking people and think you're the criminal, and some of them might be, but I love how your film really shows that side of it that most people can't and don't consider.
100%. And it's lucrative. It's a lucrative business. We know that a clean heart and a clean lung just starts, not like the aspirin, bidding starts at 130,000 on a black market. A liver and or kidney, a liver and kidney, they both start at a little bit under $100,000. Cornea of the eyes start at $30,000. So if you get a human body, and we're just being conservative here, we can conservatively say that human body can go for $500,000. Like, right? Just being conservative. It's probably way more. If a heart and lung starts at $130,000, we can conservatively say that a human body, the organs that could be trafficked, because especially a person having 2 kidneys can be trafficked, you know, then that's the value. And it's a lot safer, and traffickers have realized this, it's safer to traffic a person as it relates to organ harvesting than it is for sex trafficking. Because how long would it take a girl, if she's pimped out, sex trafficked, to earn that kind of money? Okay. And then along with that, what are the chances of that girl in a room with an undercover cop or an undercover NGO, or that trafficker has to deal with competition, or she gets diseased and dies? It's way more of a risk to traffic a girl sexually, or a boy or man or whatever sexually, than it is to organ traffic somebody. And traffickers are figuring this out because they could take the organs, burn the body, get the organs out. They make a whole lot of money. You know, there's 7 billion people on this planet. You know, if, you know, 1 million people disappear a year, 10 million people disappear a year, nobody's going to notice. See, because if we can't, as human beings, we can't grasp the concept of 7 billion people. You know what I mean? And but because of that, if 10 million, we can't even grasp the concept of seeing 10 million people, right? So 10 million people disappear, then, you know, and people go missing all the time. And so, you know, it's a very, very lucrative business. And, you know, and one of the reasons, again, these people are intelligent, they're smart, you know, and one thing I tried to do in the film is show that, but in another way is, you know, because I've had people ask, well, why won't a trafficker, let's say, I'm just throwing out a random country, if a trafficker's in Costa Rica, why doesn't he just, you know, take people from Costa Rica? Well, because that highlights him more. If you're a girl and you're getting moved from, let's say, South Sudan to Costa Rica to be trafficked for sex, or trafficked for organs, or trafficked for labor, or whatever the case, forced marriage, whatever it is. And that's another thing I'd like to touch on real quick, because when people hear human trafficking, all they think about is sex trafficking. There are multiple facets to human trafficking. There's organ harvesting, which a film touches on, labor, there's forced marriage, there's drug trafficking, where kids are used to move drugs in and out. They essentially use as slaves to move drugs in and out. I just interviewed a guy 3 weeks ago who was trafficked from Venezuela to Colombia to the Mexican border. He was lured there because the cartel and other nefarious figures are creating these fake travel agencies. and telling people, hey, come here to this place and we'll get you into the US. So he was one of those guys who were tricked, one of those victims who were tricked, ended up in a mansion in Mexico, not too far from the border, with 100 other victims. They were in rooms, no doorknobs. It was a horrible situation. I mean, I'm going to release the interview this week, but where he goes into great detail. The girls were used for sex trafficking. Men were essentially used for labor. And then they had to get their family members to send $9,000 for them to be released and allowed to and sent into America. Once the $9,000 were paid, the guys were killed. The kids were used to move drugs into the US, and they were never seen again, right? So there's these multiple facets. There's another story about that just came out of Cambodia a few months ago, where this Chinese businessman traveled to Cambodia and he was blood trafficked. He was abducted, and they just kept drawing his blood and using his blood, and for months. It's a big international story. It was on Vice, Yahoo, all the news networks, and so there's multiple facets of this. So now jumping back to what the point I was trying to make. If a person is moved from South Sudan to Costa Rica, nobody in Costa Rica knows that person. So if that person is on the street being pimped out or whatever the case may be, nobody knows that person's name. Again, I'm using South Sudan. That's probably a bad example because a black person in Costa Rica is going to stick out like a sore thumb. But you get the point. It's safer to move people out of their environment into a new environment, utilize them, and then because nobody's going to miss them. And then people in the environment the person is from, to say South Sudan, there's no way they're going to find that person, because Costa Rica is like foreign to them. Like, to think Costa Rica. And there's another story I'll jump into real quick. I'm sure you're all well aware of the story. In June, I think it was either May or June of this year, a girl went to a NBA playoff basketball game, Dallas Mavericks basketball game, and she goes to the bathroom, never comes back. Her father, goes looking for her, can't find her. Security's looking for her, can't find her. Cops come, can't find her. They write it off as a runaway. Hey, she's a teenager, she ran away. Father gets home, talks to his wife. This is not our daughter. She had no reason to run away. Life is good. This won't happen. Days go by. They find a human trafficking nonprofit that was run by veterans. Those guys go on the dark web. Who do they find? They find this girl. She had been on the dark web, had a profile up. She was being sold for sex. She was sex trafficked. They didn't have her in that same town that she lived in, or they had moved her somewhere else. And thank God these guys, they were able to conduct a sting and rescue the girl. And some of the traffickers that were at that particular place were at the game that day. So it's one of those things where, these people are smart, and it's not, some people say, well, why don't they just do it this way? It's because they're not simpletons, they're intelligent.
Well, and they caught her on social media. So it wasn't like they just went in and took her out of the bathroom. They actually connected with her and spent the time to know her and pretend like make a relationship and all that sort of stuff. So again, you're right. They aren't simple people. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly how the brain works and how we are not going to be looking for somebody in a place. Like, even just take America, take all the other countries out. If somebody from, I don't know, say North Carolina is now sitting in Phoenix, and people in North Carolina are looking for them, and they're in Phoenix, we don't know that somebody is looking for this person that is in North Carolina. We don't know that person, but we don't know. They don't stand out. They don't look different or whatever. And so we don't realize that anybody is looking for them or that there is any sort of issue.
Exactly.
So I do actually have a question back on the organ harvesting. I'm sure I know the answer, but I'm trying to get your opinion, because in the movie you're specifically speaking of one organ.
Yeah.
In that situation, after they take that organ, would the traffickers then take all of the other organs out of that victim?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I would have figured.
So for the sake of time and just focusing the story on the heart, it was just on the heart. But typically, yes, the kidneys are going, the liver's going, the lungs are going, corneas are going, absolutely everything. And a lot of people don't understand this concept of organ harvesting, and I can get why, because a good number of people are healthy for the most part. They're not people who are desperate or who need a lung, who need a kidney, who need these things. 4,000 people die in America every year because they couldn't get a kidney in time, right? And so, it's just another example. About 3 weeks ago, I spoke at a funeral of a kid, got in a car accident, 21 years old. He was a donor, and his heart went to a 25-year-old girl. His lungs went to and saved her life. His lung went to a 27-year-old man, saved his life, and each of his kidneys went to 2 other recipients, and their lives were saved. The number of people on the list for the heart and the lungs, just the heart, just the lungs, was super low. But these lucky 4 people were able to get what they need so they could live. It's just one of those things where the everyday average person can't grasp this concept of organs and the value of organs. Organs are very, very valuable, especially on the Black market. And people are desperate. When you have a child that's dying, or you yourself, and you just want to be healthy, you will go to extreme lengths. There's a story out of Costa Rica. I could jump back to Costa Rica as a real example now, but where this Israeli doctor was brokering, I'm not sure if you've heard this story, but he was brokering kidney deals. So Israelis who needed new kidneys, they would fly from Israel. This is all open source. People can, all they got to do is Google Israel, kidneys, Israeli kidneys, and Costa Rica. And what he was doing, he was working with local Costa Rican traffickers to find desperate people who were willing to sell a kidney. And they would find the matches, and because of the poverty, people would sell a kidney. That kidney would go to the proper match, who was an Israeli person. That Israeli person would fly to Costa Rica. The surgery would take place there. They go back home with a new kidney, right? So, the need for organs, there's going to always be a whole lot of people who need an organ, and there's always be but so few people who can give an organ, and not just give an organ in a certain time frame, and also be a match. So it's a very, very valuable business. And yes, so to go back to your original question, in the film, yes, in my mind, yes, all her organs were taken, all her vital organs to be transferred were taken. But for the sake of just kind of narrowing it down to that storyline to the heart, I just focused on the heart.
Well, one of the things for me that I was really struck by, I spent over 15 years of my life working in health and wellness.
Yeah.
And slowly learning about the different ways that extra money can be made by certain professionals, right? And so learning about the statistic that, let's just say hypothetically, as an average, a human body is worth $500,000. That's essentially, if you're going through a retail line, which that's what happens, that's like wholesale. And so then you think at the very end, say in a hospital, what does that number look like at the end in order to make a profit, if that's kind of the starting point, right? And so that really struck me in my heart. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you researched this or if you'd have insight, but if I believe that this is happening in hospitals, it happens everywhere, right? But is it really that unregulated to receive an organ within a hospital? Because that is really disturbing to me, thinking about somebody coming in a back door with a cooler, and this isn't accounted for in some way, shape, or form. It's just being, transferred and then, surgically implanted into somebody. And I don't know if you know anything about that, but I'm sure that there's some really, twisted things happening that people don't think about.
Yeah, as far as American hospitals, there's only been, from my memory, all research I've done, there's only been one prosecuted case, organ harvesting case. And I think that was about 5-6 years ago. Somebody Googles it, they could probably find out all of the legalities and all the stuff, the story behind it. What we do know is people do travel from the U.S. to foreign countries where the transfer of organs are not as regulated. That has happened, and it still happens to this day. And so that's why the film focused, because that actually happened. You know what I mean? That's why again, I'm not trying to give away the countries that people were in, but that's why the American parents went to this particular American country to have the surgery take place, because there are more regulations. There are more questions asked. However, I will say this, though. The driver who I had, again, his words to a T were, I get a message, I get hired, I get paid, pick up this organ at signature, take it to this particular hospital. I've been told not to ask any questions. Now, is there paperwork and documentation probably in the cooler that matches up with the hospital and all that stuff has been worked out? Did that private jet come from Florida and now here in San Diego and everything's all kosher? Probably. Could it be the other way around from his perspective? Probably. I don't know. So I don't want to project that what he said was these organs and the hospital doesn't know where they're coming from, this and that. What he made it, the main point he was making clear to me was, hey, I believe your story because I, as a driver, get hired to move coolers with organs in it, pick them up at the airport, take them to the hospital, and ask no questions. So that was the main context of the conversation. Again, I just want to make sure that we're clear there. I'm not, throwing out this thing where American hospitals are just so unorganized and corrupt in the sense that they're like, oh, here's an organ. But we do know that, for some cases, when somebody dies and in a car accident and there's a time period that heart, those lungs, those kidneys need to be taken out and need to be matched up. You don't have 2 days, you don't have 3 days. It's short, very short time periods. And that person, the recipient, has to be in the hospital, has to be ready. And so can there be a situation where in the fog of war, something happens? I'm sure. Am I saying that it is? No. And that's why my film doesn't focus on it. It focuses on what I know actually has happened, which are Americans and other Europeans and people from other countries that have wealth will travel to other places and have transplants illegally on the black market.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing that I love as far as the takeaway from this film is how you focused on just that, is that it is a global operation.
Yeah.
And how you highlighted it as well, even for how survivors can watch this and see the perspective it's being told.
Yeah.
And also with how most people, especially in America, they think, oh, this is just happening in third world countries. And they often think it's just sex. And people hear human trafficking and they think, oh, it's just sex. I love how you broke down all the different aspects. And most people don't even realize, no different than what you guys were just talking about, is it how the driver said, I get hired, this is my job, get told to don't ask questions. And sometimes some people in positions might have NDAs where they have to sign. Some people, they don't. It's just their job and that's what they're doing. They don't put 2 and 2 together because a lot of this you can't fathom. Yeah. But I love how you broke it down and how it's happening in plain sight to help people comprehend how it's happening. And so then it also helps go hand in hand. What we do is raising awareness and teaching red flags and grooming and show all the different aspects of it. So that's one thing that I valued in this film, and how you really highlight on that is because, again, even so many victims, they don't realize, especially in the entertainment industry. I worked in the entertainment industry, and you don't even realize how deep you're like in certain surroundings. Yeah. Like for me, I didn't realize a lot of it clicking until I got out and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is what I could have got into, or this is what was going on behind the scenes in green rooms or whatever it may be, working on a local level all the way to A-list celebrity and even casinos. So just looking at the different aspects of the entertainment industry and private jets and all of that, like your film really does hit home and it brings it all to reality so people can start to grasp how this is truly happening in plain sight.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, thank you. And it's and even within the different facets of human trafficking, there's 3 different types of victims as well. You have the victims who willingly give up an organ, and I've already touched on those. You know, Egypt, it happens. Again, Egypt is the organ harvesting capital of the world. There's so much poverty there. You get migrants who come from other countries who they just want a better opportunity, so they willingly sell an organ on the black. It doesn't make it legal. It's still illegal, but they still do it, right? So you have those cases. Then you have the cases of the people who are tricked, who they're told, hey, you're going to go do this in this country. Case in point, there's a story of a woman out of India, true story. Again, all of these stories I'm sharing. People, if they're like, oh, I don't believe that, just type in India, woman, whatever. As I share, and it all pop up. You know, this is all open source. This woman in India, she was in a lower caste system. She received a message one day saying, hey, you have a job opportunity in New Delhi. She's like, yes, because in the caste, which a lot of people don't even realize this, but especially trafficking is a massive thing in India. A lot of parents will sell their girls, their daughters, into sex trafficking. It's a big thing. But going back to this woman in organ harvesting, she gets excited. She goes to New Delhi. Her employer, I say that in air quotes, puts her up in an apartment, tells her, hey, tomorrow you need to go get your medical checkup in order for you to start work. She's like, absolutely. I just happy to have a job so I can, I can actually have a life. She goes to the doctor's appointment. What kept her alive was her attentiveness. After she got undressed, she overheard the doctor and the nurse in the other room. The nurse told the doctor, yep, she's giving up these organs. The woman gets dressed really quick, or runs out of the clinic, and reports the clinic and her employer to the local police. The local police carry out a raid and uncovers a multi-million-dollar organ harvesting ring that had been going on for years. So in that particular case, she was tricked. So you do get the victims who are told, hey, and this is another big thing in Dubai and the United Emirates and other places and just all around the world, where people get told, hey, you're going to go do this job in this country, in this part of Europe, or this part of the Middle East, or this part. They get there, their passports get taken, and they're doing something else, whether it's they're being sex trafficked, organ harvested, or maybe even sometimes it's labor, right? Sometimes it's forced marriage. So that's the other case of trick. But then you have the people who are forced. They're taken by force. There's so many stories in Africa of people in different African countries who are taken by force, sold, organs taken out, sold on the black market. And obviously my film touches on a specific event that actually happened with a specific group of people. That was by force. We're taking you, we're selling your organs, you're dying. And so I just wanted to make sure I hit on those three different facets of the facets of human trafficking, so that people can understand from an educational standpoint, there are people who willingly do this. There are people who are tricked into certain things, and then there are people who are by force or are being killed, and this is happening too.
Remi, thank you so much again for creating this film. We're so excited, and I know people listening are really excited to see it. I'd love for you to let us know, what is it that you hope to get out of releasing this film, and where can people find it? How can they watch the premiere, and where can they find it once it's out?
Yeah, the big thing I want people to get out of this film is that this happens. I've been doing a lot of interviews over the last 3 weeks, so many interviews. And like I did with your group, I send the film first so that people could have the context before we jump on it. One of the first things I said, I didn't know that happens. I didn't know that human trafficking was real. I didn't know that organ harvesting happened. Dude, it was so crazy, but it makes sense. I get it, And so that's what I hope this film does, is it makes people realize this happens. That's the first thing. And the second thing is it motivates them to do something. I hear people say all the time, so many people from all kinds of different backgrounds, all different political spectrums, all different creeds and colors. I hear them saying, if I lived in the 1800s when slavery was prevalent and thriving, I'd do something. I'd fight against slavery. I'd fight. I'd protect. I'd protect runaways. I'd go to war. I'd completely shut it down. I hear that all the time. Well, guess what? like I said earlier, there's more people enslaved around the world today than any other time in human history. It's a massive thing, not just here in America, not just in other parts of the world, but here in America on our borders. You know, there's a $32 billion plus industry on track to surpass the drug trade. Slavery is happening. Modern slavery is happening at a scale that has never happened before. And you have the opportunity to do something. Now, after you watch this film, the excuse "I didn't know" goes out the window. You now know, and as far as what you could do, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to go on a mission and go do this. It could be something as little as donating to a nonprofit. It could be something as little as volunteering your time to do some admin work or move boxes, or volunteering with a human trafficking organization that has an aftercare program so that you can sit with women and children and men who've been trafficked and try and take your giftings and pass them on and help them in some way. It could be similar if you have a cyber background, like helping get partnering with a human trafficking nonprofit and just going on a dark web and trying to find victims and trying to collect data and doing all of that stuff. There's something for all of us to do. If you're a filmmaker, it's making the film, and again, like for me, it was like, okay, I know that I could physically go and kick down doors and do that because I have that background, but it's not enough. And I have this ability to be able to tell story. So I'm going to do what I could do with what I have. And so that's what I say to people. I hope that it makes them aware of the realities, it motivates them to do something, and then they take the time to figure out, okay, what is it that I can do? Another thing that you could do too is you can go on, I'm sure on your podcast, you've done multiple talks on this, the signs and symptoms of a trafficked victim. That's something that's huge. There's a story that came out, I think, earlier this year of a flight attendant, Delta flight attendant. She was on a plane and she recognized just the signs and symptoms of a trafficked victim. The victim was a child with an adult. Typically, oh, that's just a person with their dad or whatever. Come to find out, the child was being trafficked. And the only reason why we found out was because the woman, she got educated, recognized the signs, and instead of saying, oh, you know what, I might be wrong and I don't want to look bad if I'm wrong, she said, you know what, I think I'm right, and I'd rather be right and do something than to be, wrong and look like a fool. And she saved that child's life. So those are the things that I hope people get out of this film. And as far as how people can watch it, again, I had the opportunity to give this to sell this film to a distributor that was going to pay me money and to put it on their platform. But then people would have to pay to watch it. And I said, absolutely not. I'm going to put this on YouTube so that way anybody from anywhere can get it and watch it for free. So it's going to be on my YouTube channel, which is simply my name, Remi Adeleke. If the algorithm messes with you, then just type in Remi Adeleke, The Unexpected. You'll be able to find some videos and that'll take you to the channel. And you can watch it on the channel for free. September 30th is when it's going to release. And again, it's free. Once it's out on that link, people can share it, send it, use it as an educational piece. But yeah, September 30th. And if people go to my YouTube channel now, but I know this will probably be out after the film comes out. But there's other content, bonus content, interviews and stuff that I've been releasing so that people can, understand how it was made and the actors getting in their mindset, so on and so forth. But YouTube, September 30th.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And everyone listening, we will make sure to create content around all of the extra footage as well as put it on our website, standbysurvivors.com. We will also link it in our show notes on every streaming platform on Save Our Children podcast and The Imagination, as well as all of the content and direct contact to get in contact with Remi. But another question I wanted to ask before we wrap up is, I know another thing that we often have talked about on our podcast, not only with human trafficking, but also the exploitation online, as well as melanin in blood attached to the organ harvesting. From what we know is that bloodlines, as well as that melanin, is literally liquid gold. Based on your experience and what you know and everything around human trafficking, is it do you see more of the organ harvesting or more of the, I guess you would like the adrenochrome, like the melanin and bloodline? I know that is huge in that industry.
I've never heard of the melanin piece at all. Personally, I like all of the work and research and stuff that I've done has all been around organ harvesting, but I've never heard of the melanin piece. But you did ask the first question before you asked that second question. I have the answer to that, but I forgot the first question. What was the first question?
Oh gosh.
Blood? Was it blood?
Yes.
No, before that. It was something, and as soon as you said it, the answer, I was like, oh, I know that answer, and then you asked the second question, but I forgot. But
now it went off the top of my head.
Well,
I'll have to add that back later. I'll go back and rewatch it, and then maybe we could add a second piece to it.
Yeah.
But for those listening, if we can share your social media handles and where they can find you on social media.
Okay, yeah. So I'm on Instagram, Remi Adeleke, RemiAdeleke. I've had a Facebook page that same name, but it's been down since March, so I can't post on it. It's weird. Like all my stuff is there, but it doesn't work. And Twitter, same thing, Remi Adeleke. LinkedIn, Remi Adeleke, and then my YouTube channel is all Remi Adeleke. So I got a unique name, so I didn't have to, when I created the accounts, I didn't have to put official, just Remi Adeleke. There is a fake official Remi Adeleke account, but that's not my account. The Instagram is a blue check, so look for the blue check on Instagram, and that's actually my account.
Perfect. Thank you. And again, everyone listening, we will make sure to link everything in the show notes and on all of our social media platforms. Remi, if you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Watch the movie. Watch the movie and then do something. And don't just watch it, share it. Watch it, share it, watch it, share it. I think, if this film, if it does, I didn't make this film for people to watch it and for it to do crazy numbers. Again, I'm not getting paid. I've lost money making this film, money that I'm never going to get back. But if this film does great numbers, then the industry will be able to see and say, I'll be able to go to the industry and say, see, there is a market for this. See, people do want truth, because at the end of the day, this film is truth. And, and so watch it, share it. Let's try and get millions of views, not for my benefit, but so that the industry can see that people want truth. People want to be educated. They want to know about this stuff so that they can make a difference. But if nobody watches it, it's not going to change anything for me. But what it is going to do is going to send a message to Hollywood. See, nobody does want to watch this. We were right. We were right in not greenlighting real movies. We were right in doing the fictionalized just to take it and the stuff. And we were right on that. And so the power is in the hands of the viewers right now. You have the power to essentially tell the industry, tell media, tell movies, producers, studios, all that, hey, people want to see this. Or you have the power to say, nope, you guys are right. People don't want to see this. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And one thing I want to point out with what you just said, as far as making sure this was going on a platform that was free, that everyone could see. One thing too is knowledge is power. Once you know better, do better, and follow the money. One thing that you've heard us, everyone listening, often talk about on both of our podcasts is when we learned about human trafficking and the underbelly of it and working hands-on with survivors. It is important to do your research, as well as when you get involved, really follow and make sure you're supporting the right organizations, because there's so many organizations out there who say that they're helping save the children, that they're helping the survivors, and they're not, which it does a disservice to the movement, because then you have creators and not only authors and film directors like Remi who are out here investing in themselves to get the message to us. But even like with us, when we first started learning about all of this, we couldn't find anyone locally that we knew enough about or got information on who was actually boots on the ground doing the work. So it actually led us to starting our own podcast, raising awareness, and it it allowed us to open our own organization so then we can help survivors and put the money directly into survivors and content creators and film directors' hands and people that we work with hands on, so we know that that's where the money was actually going. So also make sure to do your research, and then as well as, again, we live in a world of censorship. So liking, sharing, commenting, all of the film footage, even if it gets taken down, however that may look like, this is an important message and uncomfortable conversation everyone has to start to having a conversation about. And you will often hear me say on our podcast, with us living in Arizona, those of you who don't believe it's real, please come to the Arizona border. Fentanyl is a huge thing right now. And there is babies coming across the border that are dead and being stuffed with fentanyl. And they are sold into the lines of human trafficking because the mom carrying them across, or whoever that person may be, has already made that arrangement prior to them crossing that border. The baby, again, is dead, and there is fentanyl stuffed in that baby. And that is how the drug trafficking is taking place, which is, yeah.
I've seen pictures where I have a buddy of mine who's a border patrol, still is a border patrol agent. And he showed me pictures of after they uncovered the baby, they, unswaddled the baby and saw the stitches on the baby. The baby was dead. And that's how they're trying to move them in, because they figured, nobody will notice a baby that's swaddled up and asleep. The baby's asleep. Don't disturb the baby. Yeah. And the baby's not asleep. The baby is dead and stuffed with drugs. I've seen pictures. So that is not a wise tale or something fake. I've seen actual pictures of dead babies who were stapled back together after being packed full of drugs. It's real. And going back to your point, I agree with you 110%. There are so many fake nonprofits out there. Just like, it's just like anything. It's just like the church. You get churches who are just like money grab, freaking, what they call it, wealth and prosperity, preaching and teaching and give me money, and they're not really preaching the gospel. They're not really living out. And then a lot of the same churches get caught up in scandals all the time. And, things come out later. There are nonprofits like that. This relates to human trafficking, a whole lot of them. They get donors, they get a lot of people, they put up glamorous pictures and videos and all of this stuff saying, look at what we're doing. Some of that video content and pictures not even from stuff that they've done. And then on top of that, they're just lying to the public, and because they've been able to create a marketing machine, because that's all it is at the end of the day, it's turned into a marketing machine. They're not going to stop because they need to keep feeding the beast. And I've been around that. I've seen that, and it's disgusting to me. And so, yeah, like, you have to really do your research when you're thinking about partnering with a nonprofit, whether it's giving them money or anything. Don't be deceived or say, oh my God, watch a video. Oh my God, like, this is so heart-wrenching. Here's my money, take this. Like, really do your research to see if they're actually doing the work. And if there's any hint that they're not, there's a whole lot of other nonprofits out there as it relates to human trafficking that are doing the work. I've never wanted to get into the nonprofit space, and like, whether it's in ministry or not, like, I've been offered ministry jobs. I say no, I never, because I know I have all of this other stuff going on, and I never want anybody to say, oh, look at Remi, he lives in this house, he has his car, he has this, he's taking that money. No. And even with, like I said, with the film, that's all my money. Most of it is my money, $150,000. I didn't beg people to give me money. And I did with some people who were like, hey, I'll give you a few thousand. I put up my own money because I don't ever want somebody to come back and say, see, Remi just did this, so he can get money. So do your research and find the right partners, because there are a lot of sketchy partners out there. And the reality is, some of them are big, and they got big brands, and they got a lot of stuff. And because of that, they're able to portray this image that they're doing something, and they're not. So I agree.
Yeah. And honestly, thank you so much for keeping the integrity around this conversation, because that is something that was personal to our heart. Is we didn't want a nonprofit, and we didn't want to, exact same reason. So thank you so much for standing on the truth and the integrity, because if anything, and everyone listening, if you could do the survivors one thing, they don't care about the money. They care about making sure, they care about the message. They care about making sure this does not happen to anyone else and no one has to endure what they went through. And so many survivors, and it's beyond disgusting, is so many survivors get brought into these glitz and glam, and they're asked to speak and they're wanting to use their voice, but they're being profited off of from these organizations. And then the survivor later realizes it and they separate from those brands. So, and those organizations. So also make sure to follow the survivors and support how to get involved. I would say start in local community, find someone in your area who is actually boots on the ground and working hands-on to eradicate human trafficking, and get involved there. That would be a start. Or even if it's just volunteering with the unsheltered community in your area. I know Arizona right now, we look like Skid Row, like California. So again, just making sure, again, once you know better, do better, and getting involved. So again, thank you so much for joining our podcast. Everyone listening, change begins with awareness. When does it stop? When each and every single one of us have the courage to stop looking away and turning a blind eye. You don't get to look the other way on this issue. Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. We have no future if we don't protect our children. We have a duty to protect the innocent. If we don't, that blood is on our hands. Everyone has a story. Together, we must rise for the children and for humanity. It starts with one person. It starts with you. We all have a story. Again, you are not alone. Be bold. Be you. Be your own kind of beautiful. Stand tall and speak your truth. The world will adjust. They can't take your voice. It's never too late to do what's right. Survivors, you are not alone. We hear you. We see you. We stand by you. Trafficking happens in so many forms. It's not just sex. Human trafficking is the fastest growing organized crime in the world today. As our veteran sister says, be your own hero. No one is coming to save you. Janae Sergio. Sending you love, light, and prayers. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll be back for our part 2. Love, Remi, Save Our Children podcast, and The Imagination.